DeAndre Hopkins a league winner? That more this week on the couch. Dwain McFarland, DeAndre Hopkins. The big unveil is about to happen. What are we going to see when the curtain is drawn?
Yeah, we obviously got some news that may mean DeAndre Hopkins has to be the answer, right in Arizona. So we'll see today. Like, hopefully Marquise Brown is. There's an optimistic side that says it could just be 6 weeks based on the latest, but we know that Marquise Brown is seeing a specialist today for a second opinion. So we'll see what happens with that. But I happen to be on the side of, I don't think DeAndre Hopkins has hit a cliff. Like, I went back last year and just looked at all the games where he was actually coming into the game healthy, because a lot of the games that he played, he was playing like he had a shoulder injury early, right out of the gate in week 1. Then he picked up a hamstring injury, and then he eventually got shut down after trying to come back. And I think that this is a guy that still was at a 23-25% target share in the games where he's been healthy. And so if Marquise Brown is not out there, I think he's going to reassume that role. I know it's kind of funny. Yesterday, Cliff Kingsbury came out and said, well, we'll see. It's going to be kind of hard on a short week. And we're like, Cliff, like, you line him up on the left side of the field every play and tell him to do the same thing. Like, how's he not going to be ready? As long as he's in physical shape, he's going to be fine. So I think DeAndre Hopkins, like, if Marquise Brown is out next week, which we know he's going to be out next week, I don't see a way to rank him lower than like a mid-range wide receiver 2 right out of the gate.
Right. With potentially revising him up, maybe not quite to like Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams level, but he'll be the same kind of player in his offense.
Yeah. And the thing when I look at Hopkins, and these things can be tough, we can dissect these things so many different ways, but like, I try to look at like the archetypes of players. And when I compare, historically going back and looking for players that did this as they got older, and Hopkins isn't anywhere near like this player I'm about to mention that had some really good seasons, like in age 33, 34, but it's Brandon Marshall, right? Mm-hmm. Really not a guy that was just built his whole game around route running. Can run routes, but I'm open, even if I'm open, even if I'm not open kind of guy. And I don't think Hopkins is going to lose that, right? He's never been a huge separator, so as long as he's got the physicality side of his game and he's healthy, and I think that can be the problem with receivers like this, right? Because it's almost more like playing running back. You're getting beat up every play versus some of these other guys that maybe they win more on separation. They may take some big hits, but they can avoid a lot of the play-to-play contact, like linemen and some of these guys that just repetitive. I think that can add up, in some of these guys, but I think Brandon Marshall's a really good example of what we could have with a player like DeAndre Hopkins, especially if Marquise Brown is out.
I love the archetype idea. I love it. You're echoing Jung and Joseph Campbell right up the alley here. No, but I think the most important place to start, again, is just watching the game, okay? And I love, Dwain, that you start with, I went back and watched him. Because you're the king of the utilization report, and the numbers are the numbers are going to reinforce certain things. They're going to uncover certain things for us. They're going to help us. But we start with watching him, and there's a lot of talk out there that he's declining. And you brought up 2 important points. Number one, if you watch him, he didn't look like a player that was declining last year. He was still making DeAndre Hopkins plays. He just wasn't getting targeted as often, and he doesn't have the type of game that declines with the physical decline. His game isn't predicated on physical advantages. He's going to win just like Brandon Marshall. It's his game at the catch point. As
long as the quarterback trusts it and is willing to put it there, right?
Well, and isn't it the perfect offense for that?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is, right? Because here's the Arizona offense. The Arizona offense doesn't have like structural advantages created by play calling and personnel mismatches and things like that. It's just Kyler Murray do what you do, and it's been real rough. But he hasn't, and we saw last year when Hopkins went out how the offense changed. So a wide receiver who will just make a play when you need a play, if that's what Kyler Murray needs. I know you said that Murray is also a buy low, and I agree with that, because what we did get, let's not lose the lead here, we did get an Arizona team that, like we predicted, would have a defense that would force it to be basically a Kyler Murray offense. And I think DeAndre Hopkins absolutely is going to. I think what looks like an overpay for DeAndre Hopkins in a trade today, Dwayne, even because people are saying, well, no one held him for 6 weeks to just trade him away. But yeah, I think people still
We
have
hear
this.
those kind of things all the time. And, then if you just go like to Yahoo and just search
try.
like on a player's name, like you'll be amazed by some of the trades you see. And I know then people will be like, oh, that'll never happen in my league, but just give it a shot.
Just try. Well, and there's a whole other conversation here about trading in fantasy leagues that you have to have the conversation open, and maybe the trade doesn't happen this week, but you're laying the groundwork. I'm really excited. Thursday night against the Saints, I'm really excited to see this, and I think this whole offense could be lifted. And I still find myself here week 7, Dwayne, thinking of things in terms of entire offenses and revising whether the offense is going to be a limiting factor or the offense is going to be a multiplier.
Oh my gosh. I was going through this activity last night. I had no clue you would be going here. But I was thinking through this last night because like every time when I'm doing the utilization report, I start at the team level. I just talk about the context of the
That's
team.
the most coherent way to talk about football, right?
Yeah. It's like, okay, is the volume healthy? But then like, is the efficiency healthy? Like, and it can, and some teams are really strong on one side of the ball, right? Or when I say strong, I mean, they're really good, like as far as they've got a great running game, right? But they may not necessarily be throwing the ball enough to support 3 fantasy receivers. But if you're on a team that only needs to support 1 fantasy receiver, like that could be okay. So it's when I look at the Cardinals, I still see positives. Now I do not like the play calling. I don't think that, Cliff Kingsbury is like a real sharp.
No.
Yeah, I don't like that, but there are positives, and the defense not being able to stop anyone is one of them. So I mean, if you look at them, they've got the second most dropbacks per game in regulation play. So we just get rid of overtime because we can't predict it. Like I do that with a lot of the numbers that I use. They're number 2, so we know that they're going to be passing the ball plenty. And that's obviously going to be good for all the guys, including DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I think that, again, talking about this as on a data level and looking at these teams through the lens of data. Well, look, I'll tell you another theme talking about these things at a team level, Dwayne, is that it's only 6 weeks in, and I feel like I have very few of these teams pegged. I don't think the teams themselves have themselves pegged. I think that maybe this is the result of September's the new preseason, that now we're 2 weeks into October and we're just starting to figure out who these teams are. But the problem is that you have, especially if you look at it like you do, Dwayne, from a data utilization standpoint, you will see the complexion of an offense, both in terms of volume and efficiency, change so greatly depending on the game script, depending on the opponent, depending sometimes on injuries, right? Like San Francisco's defense suffers injuries, and all of a sudden it's a Jimmy Garoppolo offense. And all of a sudden it's play all 3 of the receivers, right?
Yep.
Jeff Wilson is worthless, right? And by the way, they're one of the teams being mentioned for Christian McCaffrey. Ooh. So
I don't know if that would be ooh or not. I don't know. It's like, man, he mixes players in so much. It's just like, ugh.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. I mean, my point in saying ooh is just like there's intrigue. But so we
imagine if he lands in Atlanta, that would drive everybody mad.
Yeah, I think that I guess the word from Jeremy Fowler was the Rams. Of course, the Rams were one of the teams I think immediately people thought of. Rams, Broncos, and Bills were the 3 teams I thought of. The Bills, they're saying it's Jeremy Fowler said cap long. They want to stay nimble with the cap going forward, and taking on McCaffrey might not allow them to do that. I don't know. That could also be
Kansas City made a move today with Kelsey's contract. Are they?
Yeah, and that may be a Kendrick Bourne. The Patriots are going to trade a receiver. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that too. The Patriots and taking the team level there, because they might be making a move with one of their receivers. But you can look at this stuff from that team level, and if you just look at, like you said, just run pass splits. Well, if you plot it out, some of these teams run pass splits are trading dramatically week to week. And what that's telling us is it isn't necessarily about what the team wants, the identity they want to assert. Sometimes it's about the game and the opponent, and even certain opponents, right? Like who would think that San Francisco's defense, even depleted, would be pushed around a little bit, at least a little bit, by Atlanta with 3rd and 4th string running backs and not much of a passing game to threaten downfield. But then you see Atlanta asserting their identity that they're going to try to, as long as they're competitive, right? Like Kyle Pitts, Drake London, how can you play them, right? Like we're relieved when we get 3 for 19 and a touchdown from Kyle Pitts. Let's put this in proper context, because that's Atlanta's identity when they can dictate it. So let's start.
And I think we have a decent idea of what the coaches want to do,
what they want to do. Yeah.
What they want to do, and we can see that in really their neutral pass rate, right? Like, so what is their pass rate whenever the game is within 3 points, right? It's not in the 2-minute warning, not overtime, that kind of stuff. Now, again, we may not have enough data to fully say that, because to your point, maybe we're at week 6, but that's really worth, a month of real football, considering the first 2 games really might have been more preseason, like what you mentioned, but we at least kind of have a baseline. But I think the other things you mentioned, though, that are really interesting to me that I don't think we often account enough for. And it's the same thing with analytics, like at a game level, right? When coaches are dealing with play calling and dealing with who's hurt, what kind of plays are working, all these different things that you may not necessarily just get on a piece of paper, right? That says, this is the kind of decision you should make here. And if you want it to work out over the long term, if you want to have the edge, you got to make this same decision every single time. And I get why sometimes coaches don't want to do that, right? I get, and if maybe everything's all equal and you're healthy and everything's good, like maybe that is the exact right answer. And I'm pro analytics, by the way. I'm not.
Oh God.
I know that there are nuance.
There's so no much controversy about analytics. I forget who it is, Dwayne, that just says analytics is just data. I mean, it's just saying analytics just means that you use data. We all use data, different forms of data, like numerical data, empirical data, whatever. I'm so tired. I hope that we don't spend any more. I'm not saying this to you, Dwayne. You know that. I love you. I hope we spend no more breaths. Like if national sports media wants to yap about analytics, blah blah blah, coach just hate it or don't hate it or they don't trust it or whatever. I don't care. I don't care anymore because I think anybody who actually understands the analytics is just a fancy word for saying like you gather data and you use it to make decisions. Well, that's as ordinary as anything. But we do get to, like you were saying, what coaches want to do, and you do get to trying to understand how coaches make decisions so we can simulate it, right? Because what did we run smack into again last night? Rational coaching, the assumption of rational coaching. And it is like the mechanical bull that we're riding. You're in Texas, Dwayne. I can see mechanical bull metaphors, right? I mean, it makes it like a mechanical bull, the job that we're trying to do, pretending to predict the future. Because like when I want to just bring this back up because it's fun. And I think because you are so rational that it makes you the perfect illustration. Sorry that you're like the mark in this story, that whenever Cecil said, hey, after Melvin Gordon fumbled before Javonte Williams was released, at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if they were going to release. I mean, when Javonte Williams was put on IR, I wouldn't have been surprised if they would have released Gordon after that game. And there's a lot of skepticism. And like you said, very rationally, well, how can the guy that's keeping Javonte Williams from being the lead back in this offense just be pushed aside for a guy that was on a practice squad last week? But that indeed is what they did.
Yeah. And that's one that I probably will just get wrong every time and be okay with it. Like I am probably just going to lean into like the talent. It's a free agent. Like I do trust beat reporters and I do try. And especially, Cecil's led me in the right way so many times with the Broncos. Like he definitely gets more weight. Like I've won fantasy championships based on August stuff I've gotten from listening to the Audible, from Cecil. So I know he knows his stuff. But it's just, it's like I have to draw a line somewhere and be like, because if not, like there's a narrative like this every week on 50 players. It's like, how do you chase all of those down and know which ones are real?
Of course. Well, in this case, Dwayne, it was because they benched him during the game. They benched him during that game.
And I think that, but we see players get benched all the time and come back.
Well, and that's what's tough, right? Because Chase Edmonds got benched, and then Chase Edmonds was back.
Exactly.
Nelson
and Miles Gaskins is a scratch.
Right. But I think what we lean into right here, Dwayne, is there's a layer of human psychology that we can't accurately project. We can get it right sometimes.
Yes.
You can have the winning lottery tickets, but it's always going to intervene. It's a layer that we have to just, it's like one of those fuzzy uncertainty. There's like uncertainty. There's variables. I forget the name for it. My brain is Swiss cheese now, Dwayne. I'm old. There's like variables that represent like uncertainty. in equations, right? And in this case, it's human psychology, and it's always going to trip us up. And there's other things that trip us up. Okay, so I'm going to get to some of this team level nitty gritty stuff, maybe help some people out there and find out what's on your mind. Okay, first I want to start with offenses that are led by veteran quarterbacks, and I certainly had a bias towards, well, hey, veteran quarterbacks are going to figure it out, right? You've been around the league for a while, you've proven you can do it. You have difficulties to overcome, but let's be bullish compared to expectations on these offenses. And 6 weeks in, and bad to feel that way. Let's go from like the worst to the one that's maybe not as much of an offender. Let's start with the Rams. So they're going to come together. I mean, Allen Robinson, the backfield. And yes, Cooper Kupp, but even Cooper Kupp. I mean, there's even, I think, a rational position you can take right now that's time to sell high on Cooper Kupp. Where are the Rams headed?
Yeah, the Rams don't look good at all. I mean, and a lot of this does, I really think it comes back to a couple things. One, it comes back to offensive line play. They're really struggling, up front. And then number two, I think, your offense has to be more than just one player. Like if your offense is just one player and you don't have a running game or anything else to go along with it, like it's just, you're going to eventually run into teams that can limit that. Now, Cooper Kupp's still going to come away with his catches and all that kind of stuff because McVay's a mastermind at scheming him open. This guy sees more coverage, primary coverage from linebackers and safeties than pretty much any other wide receiver in the league. And he consistently gets him into spots with these kind of route concepts where you're like, well, crap, like there goes Cooper Kupp, like wide open again. Like, how's this happening? Like, and it's just, they set these plays up time after time after time after time. And eventually some of them hit, and they hit really big. And so Cooper Kupp, I still think is going to be fine, but like it could limit his overall like touchdown upside. Like if the offense isn't humming, like he just can't score touchdowns. It's just because he can't catch a 50-yarder every time. You've got to be able to drive the ball down the field. And when you look at the Rams, like their pass rate is definitely above expectation. They've basically abandoned the run game. The defense is playing okay, but not great. And so I think it's just one of those scenarios where, and also like Matthew Stafford just is not playing well. And again, he's under a lot of pressure. And this is something that I haven't actually been able to go dig up the data on, and I want to. But what I've noticed a lot of times when I'm watching the Rams, it's like nobody's buying that play action, right? No. Yeah, they're still biting, but what's happening is the defensive ends and stuff, they're not pausing to like crash downhill on the running back. They're just like, I'm just going to keep running straight up the field in case Stafford doesn't hand it off. And it's like he's getting just flat out sacked for 10 and 11-yard losses, like, without even having a chance because they're like, oh, this is play action. And so again, that's anecdotal. That's just been based off of me sitting here watching games on Sunday, flipping around, and you're like, man, like every time Stafford goes to play action and I have it on, it's like, they're not even pausing. And it's not like it's 3rd and long, right? We're talking like, 2nd down and 3, and they still have the same mentality. So I think that's also a thing though, where the league is changing and teams are more willing to say, well, we'll give up the run. But in this case, like the linebackers and all those, players may still be filling their gaps the same way on play action, but those defensive ends, they're just keeping the mentality that it's just going to be a passing play. And so with the Rams, like I try to think about these things, Sig, I'm like, well, what has to change for the Rams,
right? Tell me a story.
Get better.
Yeah.
It's like, I guess I could tell myself the story that Allen Robinson, showed a little bit this last weekend, but like his targets per route run, his target rate, target share, all those things like have not been good. So he's really looking like he probably is more washed than good. Like, cause that was the question about Robinson, right? Was he playing hurt last year and maybe even mentally just being like, I'm done with Chicago?
Randy Moss with numbers.
All of his numbers fell for those reasons. Or was it because he's also in an age range where he could have just hit a cliff? Like we didn't know for sure, but we thought, well, it's the Rams, it's this offense, so let's lean into it, right? And Allen Robinson, you got him probably around 6 or 7 in your home league. If you played in a really competitive league, you probably had to take him around 4 or 5, not feeling too good about it. But I guess the story we could tell ourselves, for the Rams is definitely nothing about Van Jefferson. Like he's just a piece. Like he's a guy that stretches the field, but he's not like a big playmaker. Even if they sign Odell Beckham Jr., that's not going to be until later in the year. And who knows how long's, even once he's back, like how long is it going to take him to get into form? Having said that, like this has been the year of people like defying all odds when it comes to recovering from injuries, right? Yeah. All these receivers are back early. The running backs are back early. And we're seeing a lot of them, like Chris Godwin was out there 91% of the routes last weekend. Like that's huge for how late he suffered that injury last year and to be looking so good. But I I struggle with the Rams. I feel like the way they have to try to fix this is they need to be able, and this is going to sound weird to some people, it's like they need to be able to have more balance. They need to actually be able to run the ball more. And I don't know that that's going to get better because I don't really like any of their running backs.
Right.
Like I like Kyron Williams as a guy you should go grab right now and stash. But like, I think the outs for him are, well, the Rams realize they can't run. They decide they just want to throw the ball all the time. Darrell Henderson, as much as we thought he might be good in the receiving game and they use him in the receiving game, like he runs the routes, he doesn't get a lot of targets. So maybe Kyron will, if they decide to go all in on the passing games. But I mean, really, are we pinning our hopes to, a late round rookie? I don't know. I struggle. Like I struggle with the Rams on how it gets better.
And you're right to say, in the mayor of Narrative Street, Dwayne, you're right to say that you start out with like, tell me a story of how this could get better. But you also end up, again, when you do the simulation, if you're just trusting your brain, and all of us listening to the show have good brains, right? Your brain will lead you back to like, it's not going to get better. It might even get worse, or at the very least, like you said, you're projecting quote unquote positive outcomes for individual players based on a negative outcome for the offense, which is generally does not work out. Allen Robinson with Blake Bortles notwithstanding, right? And I think you're right about Robinson being more washed than just not utilized correctly. And it was when I started seeing him lose his feet after catches. Yeah. Like he just looked old.
And so much is designed for Cooper Kupp. Like, when you get it's like 50% of the route concepts that we see look like it's designed to make Kupp wide open. Is what they're trying to do. So when that's your starting point, and then you're also dealing with deteriorating skill set, and your route tree is not really diverse. Like, there's not a lot of room for
and then
Robinson.
So you've got the offensive line, and basically, like you described, Dwayne, they're going to be working in a compressed field. So, or to put it another way, the Sean McVay offense is not manipulating the defense anymore. Like you said, the defense isn't giving them credit. They're not honoring what they're showing. They're just saying we can play downhill. Gene Bramwell, who I had the joy of doing shows with for so many years, maybe we'll do some shows again down the line. He said when we do the IDP show, he had this phrase he used: playing the run on the way to the quarterback. And that's what teams are doing against the Rams. So even if it was, Allen Robinson could get open downfield, they can't throw downfield anyway. And it seems like and Sean McVay did say after week 5, I'm going to go back to the drawing board. And he did. You saw more Brandon Powell, right? You saw a more even target distribution. You saw Ben Skowronek showing he should continue to be involved in creative ways. He scored on an end around. And I think what you're seeing, again, we're seeing this happen with the Bengals, where teams, offenses that we anticipated having more vertical element to their passing game are having to operate within like the 20 yards past the line of scrimmage and just design plays and make that work because that's what's available to them. Because in the Rams case, they've had so many offensive line injuries, they're just not going to be able to throw downfield, and they're not going to be able to quote unquote establish the run. And like you said, with which running back. Anyway, okay, let's move on to another disappointing offense. Oh boy. Every week, basically, and again, Dwayne, the exercise is what's bad for this offense is good for who. When Aaron Rodgers is frustrated, who's the guy that he is used to that he's just going to throw to 15 times that day because nothing else is working, because the deep ball can't get online? Is Aaron Rodgers going to figure this out? You have a great running backs. You have experienced offensive line. Maybe you shuffle offensive line. This one, at least there's some stories we can tell ourselves, some glimmer of hope that this can become a productive offense again. And I'm looking at you, A.J. Dillon.
Yeah, I think the challenge for the Packers is they just don't have a superstar for Aaron Rodgers to get the ball to in the passing game. Allen Lazard has been a nice player this year, but he's an 18-20% target share guy. This is not a guy that can just create 30% on his own, and then you have a running game to go along with it, and then some complementary pieces, right? So when we look at Romeo Doubs, he's kind of looking to be similar to that. Like they're really similar as far as their target rates and all those kind of things that I try to look at. Like the number one thing I want to know for a receiver is, can they earn targets? Every receiver, in the NFL pretty much can be at like 10 to 15% because you can get schemed a little bit and you can be around that. But the guys that get to like 25 and 30%, like they're really the true, elite players. And really Aaron Rodgers has had that over the last several years, with Devontae Adams. And before that, he had, back in the day, right, we had Jordy Nelson plus Randall Cobb plus Devontae Adams coming up. He'd always had multiple weapons or one really elite weapon. And he doesn't have that this year. And so I think we're seeing the growing pains. And like when you just watch Aaron Rodgers' body language, which is just like a fun experiment in itself, like at any moment, but like when you watch him, like you can just tell like everybody's not on the same page. And Lazard's been coming through, with the touchdowns, but on a consistent basis, having someone that he can trust. I don't think he has it.
No.
I mean, we saw Robert Tonyan get more involved this last week because Randall Cobb was hurt.
Right.
Tonyan was really, a guy that kind of scored a lot of touchdowns because everybody had to worry about, Devontae Adams. But now you're needing him to actually be someone that can do more. I do think the path is having teams so scared about the running game, a la Cleveland, with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, that they just really need to get these two guys going. And I think the other answer is let's get Aaron Jones more involved in the passing game. Like running backs are one of the easiest positions to scheme up in the passing game because they get immediate cushion like a slot receiver, but even more by their alignment in the backfield. Right. And Aaron Jones is a guy that we've seen, Sig, we've seen him over the years. Like he is more along the archetype. He's not quite a Kamara or a CMC, but he's not just a swing pass guy. This is a guy that we've seen work, angle routes, bullet routes down the field, catch the ball, track the ball over his shoulder deep, catch deep touchdown passes. Not that he's going to be doing that all the time. A lot of it just needs to be schemed up around the line of scrimmage. That's what I don't get. Like a playmaker like that, it seems like for me, Aaron Jones should have a 15-20% target share, and A.J. Dillon should be getting 65 to 70% of the rushing attempts. And like you just divide it up like that. You keep them both active. You don't overload either guy. You keep defenses guessing, and then maybe you loosen up some of the things for the other guys outside. Get the defense really focused in on having to deal with those two players. And I thought that was what we would see this year, and we just
rational coaching.
Yeah,
it's not there. Yeah. I've been way off. Go ahead.
No, and the game scripts overall, like until the last, 2 games, had actually been there for these players, and they still were not showing, a ton. Now the last 2 games, they've been down, and so they've had to immediately throw the ball more. But still, that's when you can easily get Aaron Jones more involved. I don't get it. Like I feel like Aaron Jones is probably the best weapon on the team, overall, and they're just not getting the ball enough.
Yeah, it's really odd. I agree with you on everything you said there. In that. It explains also, like, I missed badly on this offense. I thought the defense was going to be good. They have a great defense on paper. I thought that the offensive line was going to be better with the veteran tackles returning, and we still could see maybe a little shuffle there. Maybe get Yosh Nijman out there, Zach Tom. They've got tackle depth to maybe kick Jenkins inside. Maybe that helps a little bit. Like you said, Aaron Jones is a receiver. That's what we saw when Devontae Adams was out, right? That became one of the
all those splits that we were leaning into all offseason.
And it's not there.
Man, look at his yards per route run. Look at his targets per route run. Like they were all insane without Devontae Adams.
Good things happen when you throw the ball to him. Good things happen and you just throw the ball to more. So it's funny because it was LaFleur against LaFleur this week, and Matt got out LaFleured by Mike. In that the Jets had the game plan that the Packers should have had all along, right? And you run the offense through your backfield. And like you said, you laid it out perfectly. I hope that they're listening, that you use A.J. Dillon. And here's what A.J. Dillon can do. Even if he only puts you in 3rd and 4, Aaron Rodgers can get you 3rd and 4. But every time the defense has to take on all those blocks and tackle A.J. Dillon, by the 4th quarter, they're tired of that. And also lulling them into, here we go, another get Dillon to rhythm, another run. Then when you go with the play action passing downfield, now you've got something, and maybe it'll become the answer for them. But
they've actually been doing a pretty nice job of staying ahead of like bad down and distances. Like, so if you look at I like looking at 3rd and 4th down and 7+ yards, because you look at the last 5 years in the NFL, it pretty much means you're getting man coverage with a blitz. Like it's coming, like, and you're just not going to have time. Like you're not going to have time to get 7 yards in a lot of those cases, because they'll also put like a defender sitting in the middle, like hovering underneath the slants and all that kind of stuff. So they make you have to take a shot downfield. So Green Bay's actually been pretty good. They've only faced 8.8% of their plays have been 3rd or 4th down and 7+ yards, which is 26, and 26 being better. Like if you're first in this stat, it's bad. Right. That's Denver. Right. Denver 12.4% first. So we're not getting that, from the Packers, but I think they've just got to get more creative with just getting some more guys involved into the passing game. Again, Aaron Jones. I think all roads lead back to Aaron Jones in the passing game.
Yeah, maybe when Christian Watson gets healthy, maybe that adds up that vertical element. They cannot get
that would be nice.
They can't get the
but again, it's a rookie. like that we're dependent. And I do think he could give you that vertical element, because
Right.
Romeo Doubs, like he can do that, but like that's probably not like his number one asset, to his game.
Yeah, you hope that, and the thing is, they keep going with the downfield passing, the deep ball passing, which is just not working. And there are offenses, again, like Cincinnati's, like Kansas City's last year. And this is where the utilization stuff can also, we have to always think about it in context. That was your original tag on your handle. Context matters.
Yep.
Because teams do change their identity during the season, like Philadelphia last year. Like teams do realize, like, oh, this is going to work better. And for Green Bay, I think it's just the deep ball's not happening, and it's stalling out the offense. Like you said, it may be because defenses are forcing them because they're taking away the short stuff and forcing that. Either way, you got to advance. You got to evolve. Okay, let's be a little more positive. Let's talk about a little.
Let's be positive.
So I'm revising 2 offenses. Let's start with the less dramatic revision. The Giants have a functional offense. Dwain. Is there any way we benefit from this, or do you agree? And if you do, is there any way we can benefit from this in fantasy football?
Yeah, the Giants are doing a few nice things. I worry that it could still implode at any time. Like time of possession has really gone their way. They've done a nice job. They've held the ball for 52%, of the potential, time, which is one of the better marks in the league. Right now, that ranks as 6th best in the NFL. The other thing they're doing is neutral play clock remaining. So in neutral game strips, so that's when you're within 3 points, how much play clock on average is remaining? 10.8 seconds. That is actually 7th in the league. So they're possessing the ball, they're using tempo to their advantage, and they're trying to find schematic ways to make up for the receivers that they don't have. And they're getting creative with what they're doing with Saquon Barkley. I do think eventually, though, like someone has to step forward, in the receiving room. And I think there's really 3 options. I don't think it's any of the guys that have been out there so far until this last week. You have Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yes.
They only eased him into action. He was only out there for 37% of the routes this last week, but it was really his first out. He was out there week 1, then he got picked up the knee injury and he missed, until now. So they're easing him back in. But when we look at the rest of these guys, none of them are historical target earners. None of them look like target earners this season. But Wan'Dale, when he was out there, he had a really good targets per route run this week, which is something I like to look at for a player that doesn't get like the full workload, in a game or over a period of time. Like I was looking
Alec
at,
Pierce.
Yes, Alec Pierce is another one where it's been great for that. It's great for that kind of thing when somebody's only out there 30, 60%, of the time. And so when I was looking at Wan'Dale Robinson this week, doing all my stuff, my wife says I go into the bunker. She doesn't see me for like 18 hours. It's like me writing the utilization report. And like Wan'Dale Robinson was like one of the biggest names. It was really popping up for me. And when I looked at, what he had done, this last weekend, like it immediately, I know he wasn't out there for enough of the routes, but I don't see a way that like he doesn't. Like I think it's just going to increase. And this is a guy that, we could see him get 20, 25% of the targets. Like he can go as far as his talent's willing to take him. His talent will be the barrier, that and being healthy, because there's no one else on the team to stop him. Kadarius Toney could stop him, but Kadarius Toney can't get out of his own way.
He's an urban legend.
And even then, like you could be fine, like with 2 players. The other player that I would mention, on this offense, and it's just it's another young guy, but it is Daniel Bellinger, the tight end. So we've really seen him over the last couple of games, like pick things up as well. He was actually out there for over 80% of the routes this last week. That's the number we want for tight ends historically. Like if you can just, it's a cheat code, folks, at tight end. If you can have a tight end that just stays over the 80% route participation for the season, they have like a 90% chance of finishing in the top 12 tight ends. Now, if they're a talented tight end, it like almost assures they're going to be in the top 6. We don't know for sure like which Daniel Bellinger is yet. But again, it just comes back to the fact that like we've got a lot of these guys that it's almost like remember the show Major League when they're trying to put together the team and the coach is like, who are these guys? And the other coach is like, this guy here's dead. I mean, that's how it feels right now with the Giants receiver.
Right,
we're like, and no offense, like they're professional football players, but we, David Sills, like, it's like, we want good things for all of them. We would love for them to all be superstars, but the fact of the matter is they're not. And so these 2 rookies could really play key roles. So, I mean, I put Wan'Dale Robinson as a major upgrade in the utilization report this week. I put him at the top of the free agent bids for me, ahead of guys like Latavius Murray, who we've already talked about. They're older, it's kind of a fragile offense. Like the Giants, I'm like, well, The offense is functional, to your point. I don't know that it'll remain great, but like there's no one here to stop.
That's more than we expected. That's more than we should rationally expect from, like you said, the personnel. Well, and you put it in context, because what do we cite if things are bad for Justin Fields? We'll look at the receivers. Baltimore and Lamar Jackson, look at the receivers without Bateman out there. We'll look at the Giants receivers, and we're not saying that. Daniel Jones has 4 fourth quarter comebacks this year. 4. They're making it work, and I think you're right to focus on Robinson.
Bellinger, two out of the last 3 weeks, he's hit the 20% target rate as well, or target share. So I like both of these players, especially if you're in a deeper format. Like if you're playing in like an 8-10 team league, you're probably not messing with either one of these players. But if you're playing in 12 team, 14 teamers, or if you're playing in a smaller league that has really deep benches, like these are 2 names that you should definitely be thinking about.
Yeah, especially Robinson, especially Robinson, because he looked strong and swift on his touches, on his receptions. He's undersized, but he's not afraid to work the middle of the field. This team clearly had a plan for him, and his snaps and his targets, everything's going to start going
36% targets per route run. Last week for Robinson. So we know he won't have 36%. Like, but the other thing about it, like, it wasn't like, last year I remember in a couple of games, like people got real excited around, like, and I like this player, Rondale Moore. But they were like, wow, look at this, like a 30% targets per route run. And I went and looked at it. I'm like, yeah, but like that was 5 targets and 4 of them were screens. Like you can't do that all game, every game. With Wan'Dale, that was something I immediately went to look at because he is more of a, an underneath kind of player. They played him from the slot mostly last weekend, but his average depth of target was 9.3. He was actually out there running a full route tree and earning these targets, not just something where it's like, oh, everything was 100% designed just to immediately get the ball in his hands. That wasn't the case, but he has that capability. So anytime you have a player that can do both of those, or a team wants to scheme more for them, but then they can also earn on their own, those are the players that can surprise you. And you can look up and be like, wow, like this guy's averaging like 26%, targets per game. Like that could happen for Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yeah. And real simply, Dwayne, we were talking about, like, you can start again. So here's my analytics spiel to an extent. You use analytics to ask questions, not answer questions. The question you ask is, when you find players that have this high target, so high percentage targets per route run means the team's getting this player involved. Okay, that says this requires more investigation.
Yes.
What did they do with the targets? How did it go? With Rondale Moore, he wasn't doing anything with them last year. Wan'Dale Robinson scored. I mean, that alone is like a Herculean task in this offense. And he's going to build trust, and he was barely out there. So that's the question. Now, could Tyquan Thornton be another one that we look back and we say, well, of course we should have seen this coming?
Yeah, so Tyquan was another guy that I talked about, today in the utilization report. We had Nelson Aguilar inactive. You had Kendrick Bourne get hurt early in the game, and he definitely took advantage of that. He saw a season high 73% route participation, but 20% targets per route run over the last 2 games. So he was definitely, involved. He also had the rushing attempt. So they're trying to do things to get him the ball. I think with him, what we need to know, like, is what's New England going to do, with the receiver room? And they're historically, this is a team that also, outside of like Jacoby Myers or whoever their slot receiver is, unless they have someone that's really good, like they rotate them all the time. So I did put Wan'Dale Robinson ahead of Tyquan Thornton, but I had Tyquan Thornton as the next receiver on my list. The thing about Thornton is, like, he could give the Patriots something they don't have right now. Jacoby Myers can demand those targets over the middle. He can work against all the zone coverage. He can help you keep the chains moving. Hunter Henry's really kind of that same mold, but they don't have anyone. They had hoped, right? Nelson Aguilar could really be the guy to stretch the field. It just hasn't worked out, like, to this point. Devontae Parker, I think they kind of hoped could be that down the field contested catch guy. And he's had some moments, but they haven't had anyone to consistently test the vertical boundary, especially when you think about the kind of football that New England wants to play. They are basing things around their running game. They are basing things around making teams have to commit more resources to the box and then trying to get over the top. So I feel like Tyquan Thornton, like, stylistically, there's an easy path if we wanted to go down narrative street where I could say, like, this is the guy they need on the field. Like, because if they want to run the offense they're running and he's showing these flashes, like, we already know they have the other weapons to do the other stuff underneath. They need someone that can make the defense respect, the speed. And if they don't, like, he can come through and score, a touchdown from 50 yards out. Like, I think Tyquan Thornton could be that. I mean, I put him below Robinson just because I don't trust New England when it comes to stuff like this. They just rotate people so damn much it drives you nuts. But there's always there's a chance. The talent looked good, and watching him in week 1, it looked good in his first week.
And we can add to that picture again. Nelson Aguilar maybe on the way out. Kendrick Bourne maybe on the way out. This team could be looking to move a receiver, and Tyquan Thornton being healthy and productive is part of that. And Dwain, it's funny because we fill up so many words and numbers and podcast minutes with all of our analysis, but there's a real simple way. I think it was my man Jared who coined the Occam's waiver thing, right? It's just pick up the highest scoring player that's on waivers. Here's some analysis for you. Tyquan Thornton scored 2 touchdowns last week. Pick him up. And maybe that's all there is to it. I mean, I'm just saying, we want to build up all this scaffolding around it when the game is showing us, this guy was on the field with the backup quarterback, the 3rd string quarterback, and he scored 2 touchdowns. And the other part of that is, again, going back to the happier stories, I didn't give the Patriots offense any respect. Joe Judge and Matt Patricia, I didn't give it any respect. And all those reports right before camp, right after camp broke, oh man, they're so disgusted with their offense. They're scrapping parts of it and things like that. I was like, that sounds like, and their offensive line is out.
And by all accounts, it's been pretty bad until the last couple of games.
Well, and then again, that's teams' identities changing. That's teams, or maybe we have to give teams a little bit of time now with the camp and preseason not getting them prepared as much as it used to. And New England's not just a functional offense, which I didn't even have them being truly functional offense outside of the running game, Dwayne. They're potentially a value add offense for everybody. Maybe, I mean, the funny thing is people saying Cleveland, they're wide open receivers and he had time to throw. Well, what else do you expect a good offense to do but make a bad defense look bad? And put the 3rd string, 4th round quarterback, light them up. Okay, we have just a couple minutes before we go off the rails, Dwayne. And I want to. And by the way, again, a theme I mentioned this on the Waiver show: rookie wide receivers, Wan'Dale Robinson, Tyquan Thornton, Alec Pierce mentioned in passing. Don't forget about Khalil Shakir. Rookie wide receivers. The game is changing. Real quick, because speaking about offenses changing identities and offensive identities being based on game scripts, and in this case, there might be a little bit of a personnel change to mentality also, because not to take away anything from Rashad Penny, and Rashad Penny was very productive when he was healthy, but Kenneth Walker's the heir to Marshawn Lynch. And all of a sudden the defense is playing better, and all of a sudden Seattle looks like a different team, and Geno Smith was a revelation. And for fantasy, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, massive home runs at ADP. Last week, not so much, because this team could win with defense in the running game. And then it's maybe Kenneth Walker league winner. Do you think that game script is going to push us back to this, and it's still going to be Geno throwing to Lockett and Metcalf? Or when we project this offense going forward, Dwayne, and this team, because the defense is part of this picture, that we should look at week 6 as a sign of what's to come?
I think really the weeks you've seen before this are more likely what we're going to see, but I think it's going to be good for everyone. I think it's good for Kenneth Walker still. The Seahawks, you talk about things that we wouldn't have seen. It's kind of interesting. I may write about this later in the week, but because, everybody wants to argue about, well, I was right or I was wrong. I faded Deontay Johnson. I was right. Bad offensive environment. I faded DJ Moore. Didn't have a good quarterback. I was right. Well, how do you feel about fading DK Metcalf?
Right.
How do you feel about fading Tyler Lockett? Which I faded both of those guys too much. I faded a lot of the offenses that I didn't have, trust in, unless a player fell past ADP. I draft enough teams that I still got some exposure, but it's really been kind of a split. There's certain guys we can look at and be like, yeah, this worked out great. So glad that I didn't draft DJ Moore. Yeah. So glad that I didn't draft Deontay Johnson. But then for every one of those, there's a flip side. There's a flip side to it. And then there's also players that are on good offenses that we loved, like Allen Robinson. I'm drafting a guy from a good offense. I'm not taking DJ Moore. Well, how's Allen Robinson? Not good. Not good. Mm-hmm. So it's these are very complex things, and I know it is nice sometimes to just simplify it, who's scoring the fantasy points. But going back, to the Seahawks, they have been a revelation. I've been talking about them for the last couple of weeks in the utilization report. And talk about a zebra changing their stripes. That is what Pete Carroll has done. He came out and said it before the week 3 game. He said they were going to do this. He said, you know what? We're going to run more up-tempo stuff. We've seen Geno enough. We trust him, AKA we don't think he's going to turn the ball over if we cut him loose. That's what Pete Carroll's saying. This is a defensive-minded coach, y'all. That's what he means. But Geno, to his credit, has done a good job with that. But if you look at them, neutral play clock remaining on average 11.9 seconds. That is number 1 in the NFL. So he was not just saying that. He's actually followed through with that, Pete Carroll in this offense. And that has been the huge change. If you look at their plays per minute, they're 14th in the league, but that has jumped up like multiple spots each of the last 2 weeks. If you look at them, from a standpoint of just, how much they like to throw the ball, they're above the league average right now when trailing, 75% pass rate versus 70% for the NFL average. They're right at the average in close game scripts. And when they're leading, they're throwing the ball 4 percentage points above the NFL average. So we're seeing some things from Pete Carroll where overall the identity really is the passing game. It's about DK Metcalf. It's about Tyler Lockett. Now, having said that, the very interesting thing to me, Sig, about Kenneth Walker is not, you've already mentioned, he's a badass. Like, he is awesome. There's no doubt. Like, I was watching him and I was like, I love watching film of these guys, and that's my favorite thing, like in March and April, coming up to the draft, just watching these and running backs are one of my favorite. But man, just watching this guy in split zone and his cutback, I was like, this is like a highlight reel. Like, if you could just like pull up all split zone stuff and like you could teach a class. And then I started thinking, no, you couldn't teach a class because no one else can make that cut like he's making.
Right,
it's like one of like 4 people like that I've watched in my like life that can do it so easily as him. But one thing that I was noticing with him is, he wasn't using the passing game in college. And again, this is where analytics, like if you're looking at dynasty stuff, it'll be like, well, if a running back hasn't caught passes in college, they're probably not going to catch passes in the pros. And the thing that has been the most interesting to me with Kenneth Walker is just like over the last, even before the injury, to Rashad Penny, is they were getting him out there, Sig, on long down and distance stuff. What is long down and distance, right? That is the moment when a defense is going to test your pass protection. They are going to blitz in the NFL. Whenever you get to that situation, they're going to go man coverage. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and they had already been getting Kenneth Walker out there. He had gone from 8% of those snaps to 11% to 22%. This last week, 46% of the snaps in those scenarios went to Kenneth Walker. We did still see DJ Dallas get all the 2-minute offense, so he was coming off for those. But then, like we factor in targets per route run, Kenneth Walker sitting at 22% targets per route run this season. Last weekend had a 10% target share. So the big thing for me with him is even if the Seahawks keep throwing the ball, I think he's going to be much more involved in the passing game than what anyone ever expected. And like, it doesn't surprise me because like Kenneth Walker, if you watch the film, you see how fluid he is. You're like, this guy's not going to have a problem catching the ball down the field. Like, he can easily, like, he's got the kind of, fluidity, right, that's going to allow him to turn back and catch the ball or track it over his, body, whatever he may need to do. He's not just one of these guys that's just a swing pass check down guy. I think he can be much more. And so I'm super excited about Kenneth Walker. Like, I could give you all sorts of stats if you wanted just on what he's doing on the ground. It's nuts. Like his missed tackles force per attempt, 0.50. The league average is 0.17. I mean, so he's he's basically tripling it up. Yards after contact, 3.14, well above the NFL average. Explosive rush rate. So these are carries of 10 plus yards or more, and coaches love this because it's an automatic first down every time you get one, right? And it's extending your drive without taking 3 plays to get there. 16%. The league average is 11.5%. So I mean, Kenneth Walker, by every standard you would want, and not just in the running game, in the passing game. So historically, like an RB1, Sig, over the last 10 years, going back to 2011, is a 21% targets per route run. So I think Kenneth Walker is already showing us that he's got the ability to be more. And once you can get out there on the field and your coaches trust you in the most critical down where you've got to pick up the blitz, the 2-minute offense is actually easier because you're usually not getting blitz. The defense is doing the opposite. They're actually saying, we're ahead. We're just going to play shell coverage. And you saw it last night in the game was a perfect example. They just checked down to Eckler, check down to Eckler, check down to Eckler. There's a path where Kenneth Walker, all of a sudden we look up and we're like, wow, like Kenneth Walker's getting some of the 2-minute offense now. And man, if that happens, like he's going to be a top 5 back.
Yeah. If you traded for Kenneth Walker last week in your fantasy league and it looked like you overpaid, you got a bargain.
Yep.
We might be saying the same thing after this week. We might. I mean, even if you overpay based on his new recalibrated value this week, if you overpay for him, basically if you're paying anything short of like Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler kind of prices, you're not overpaying for him. And maybe if you do some sort of deal where you have one of those guys, Derrick Henry, like you do Derrick Henry for Kenneth Walker plus, or straight up, maybe even straight up.
I would add something to that, but just because, the name value that we know
exactly
Henry, you
try for
maximize.
That.
Yeah.
But try for it. And who knew, Dwayne, that one of the biggest fantasy football questions of the offseason was, whose side are you taking in the Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson divorce? And almost all of us took Russell Wilson's side, but it was actually Pete Carroll who was right. Okay, like I want to do real lightning round. Like I'm going to try to get like one word. I know it's hard, but just because I want to, because it's so valuable.
You're just trying to test my boundaries. Okay.
Well, yeah. No. I'm really trying to get the information for the good people who take time.
I'm with you.
Real quick. Justin Fields, 3 times they got to the goal line, didn't get a point, and he still had a pretty good fantasy game. Is there something there?
Yes, just because he is scrambling a lot, and that alone is going to give you potential fantasy value. He does not look good, but I know these are supposed to be one-word answers, but like we've seen Tim Tebow produce in fantasy football. We've seen Taysom Hill start at quarterback. Justin Fields is as good as those two guys at least. So he could still be a top 12 quarterback. Yeah. I moved him into my mid-range. Yeah. He had started off as a high-end QB2 for me. Then he fell all the way to low-end QB2. Now he's back to at least mid-range QB2 rest of the way. Another good game, and he'll be high-end QB2.
Yeah, I would say matchup quarterback 1. Let Bill Belichick humble him this week, and then go and get him. Do you want to trade for Christian McCaffrey or trade him away?
I'm trading for him.
Okay. I mean, if it's a better environment, are you last one?
I don't even care if it's a better environment. Like the guy just earns targets on such a high rate. Right. Like he's still going to pay off the value, for you.
That's fair.
I mean, he's just too involved in the passing game.
That's fair.
But if you do happen to get an upgrade, wherever he lands.
Yeah,
man. If he did go to Kansas City, you would never see Clyde Edwards-Helaire again. You wouldn't see, and you wouldn't see any of those guys. Yeah, it would be all CMC. Could you imagine 80% snap rate CMC with Patrick Mahomes? So because Juju's not earning targets. MVS is not earning targets. They're getting leftovers behind what Travis Kelce's demanding. Yeah. I think he would be the number 2 target behind Kelce on the team.
Yeah. I mean,
he might tie in. They might both be at like 25%.
I mean, there's a few possibilities that maybe aren't as exciting, like the Broncos or the Rams, but there's exciting responsibilities like the Bills or the.
I think the Rams would even be okay. The Broncos scare the crap out of me.
Yeah, that would be
Nathaniel Hackett scares me so.
Nothing can grow there. Last one, real quick, just because I'm genuinely curious what you're going to say. This. Are you interested in any Ravens running back?
I'm really not. I'm just staying away.
It occurred to me while we were analyzing it. I'm like, just get the one that didn't have a big offseason surgery. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
They all did.
I've talked about Edwards the last 2 weeks in my column just because you can get him for nothing. He's available in most leagues. And the tightening up of the knee thing with J.K. Dobbins is just another reason to think about it. But Lamar Jackson's getting his. They historically over the last 3 seasons have always rotated guys. And even, and again, they're all dealing with the injuries. So, and then the guys that could get the ball, like, I'm just not that excited about Kenyan Drake. Like, I know he did okay this last weekend, and maybe the simple thing is he scored, like you mentioned, but overall, like, his body of work has not been good in about 2 years.
Yeah, and it was a shock to see him do what he did. If there's one, I'll say it was even just like reversing field and doing some of the stuff we haven't seen him do since he was like Miami.
And the thing is, he loses his role as soon as Justice Hill's back. So
that's the guy. If there is going to be a someone to pull the sword from the stone for fantasy, Justice Hill looked good. And they just go.
He's explosive, right? We like
got the initial acceleration,
playmakers. Yes. That can also catch balls. He checks both of those boxes for sure.
Yeah. So that's it. But I think you're right. The right answer is probably none of the above. If you're going to add one, I'd say add Hill. Okay. We got this a little more abbreviated off the rails, but I'm going to go like big picture, right? Like Conan. Like, what do you what do you want? But really, like, not related to football. Okay, Dwayne.
Yeah. Okay.
What makes you happy? Football. What makes you happy?
Man, what makes me happy is just getting to be who you are. Like, I think that's the thing, like, I've learned the most. Like, seriously. We're always out to improve. We're always out to change things and make ourselves better. But what I've just learned, and this is not just through doing fantasy stuff, but it's like through, my career. But it's part of why I took a sabbatical back in the day. And it's also what ultimately opened up the door to me doing this full time. Like, I was living in the corporate world. And kind of like, I was talking about some of these players today, like, oh, man, I don't know if that could ever hit. The Patriots rotate guys so much, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, there was all these things in my head that were kind of barriers to me doing this full time. And as soon as, like, I just allowed myself, like, to really, like, lean into it and think about, like, what is it, like, that I want to do with my life and why? And that's the bigger picture, right? It's the why. Like, being authentic to like, what makes you happy. What are the things that whenever you're doing them, you enjoy them, the most. And for me, it is getting to be around my family and do all these different things with my kids and my wife, and then getting to, talk and look at football stuff, like analyze, and again, it's deeper than that. Like I've always loved numbers. We've talked about this in the past. Like when I was a kid playing, video games that, giving my age away here, but they didn't even track like your season stats. Like I would be writing them down after every game, and I would plot out the season. And I was like Tecmo Bowl. I didn't even have a full slate of teams to play against, so I would substitute and play certain teams 2 or 3 times and say, no, that was a matchup against whatever team wasn't on the game. Like, so just like going even as far back as like my childhood, like I've always loved numbers. I've always loved data. I've always loved football. I've always loved all these things that I've always liked. Like really being able to get into a situation where that is what I'm doing, and being in a role where I'm working from home, I get to be around my family more. Like, so I think it's just being true, like to yourself, and figuring out a way to make it happen, and it's not, I have had a lot of good fortune and luck involved as well, and like being able to go on this journey. So it can take longer, right, than what some people, expect. Like I've been working on this for 5 years.
Yes, there's no overnight successes. There's no such thing as an overnight success. And I echo so many things of what you said. And I find myself sometimes saying, follow your passion, like what lights you up, what's attractive in life, and truly like attracting people and things to you is enthusiasm, positivity, passion. But like you said, I mean, and look, I'm going to take the subtext and make a text like we're both white guys. And so it's easy. Like we've been raised to just do what you want to do. Like that's what you're raised to do. Be what you want to be, do what you want to be. Not everybody gets that message from the universe, from our culture, not from the universe. The universe is different, but from our culture, or from like the overriding messages out there. However, so I don't want to downplay, like for a lot of people, they just don't have the option of like being their authentic self and finding a way for their work to merge with their authentic self. So I don't want to dismiss that. And it's, in some ways it shows like our experience. But I agree with you. And I've made that speech many times. But getting beyond that, there is a thing of like wearing a mask, feeling like you're wearing a mask, or feeling like you're not your soul, or something about your authentic self is having to stay below the surface. And like you said, one of the greatest joys is just those moments that it can come to the surface, and it gets you back to just the joy of participation. Like the greatest joy is just the joy that you have when you just feel happy to be alive, like blessed just to be alive and be you. Only one person gets to be you. So enjoy it. Like consider it an honor. Consider it something precious that you get to be you. Nobody else does. And everybody has something like special and wonderful to offer the world if they can be their authentic self.
That's the hard absolutely. Part.
That's the hard
and
part.
Like when you are, that's also when other people around you get the most value from it.
Yeah, well, that's your light. I mean, that's when your love light shines. That's whenever people can see it. I mean, you can actually observe it. But I love that you go back to childhood. And I think for anybody out there, if you're stuck, go back to your childhood. What did you do with your free time as a kid? That is a clue to what's going to make you happy as an adult. It is a clue, and maybe not just a clue, because it's not like detective work. I mean, I used to walk around and interview my family with my tape recorder. But like you,
that doesn't surprise me,
right? But like you, Dwain, I would sometimes up in my room on a weekend, I would do this thing where like a balled up sock, and I have like the length of my room, and I would have like throw it up in the air and see if I could get it and catch it, and it would be worth a point or whatever. And I would do like a whole bracket with the 50 states and play out matchups and like keep track of it. Like I have a whole little league of a made up sport in my room to see which. Last week Arkansas beat Wyoming in the final. This week we'll see it's going to be Missouri going up against Tennessee. Just that was fun for me, like playing out some made up sports season and tracking it. And I think that leads us right to where we are today, right?
And now kids just tell you they're bored if they can't play video games. And look, they got to see what Sig was doing.
It's hard, man. It's hard. Well, that's a whole other topic, right? Because we're getting older. We're getting older. And I think our parents thought the same thing about us, and their parents thought the same thing about them.
Yes.
And so on. And we're getting old enough now to look at the world. Cecil and I were discussing this earlier off the air about like, if you get old enough, I have a saying that I made up. Maybe someone else has said it. It's like, may you live to be old enough to see that the world is a wicked place. And there's a whole other conversation here about screens. I think people in education can speak to this for sure, that it is changing like our brain mapping, and the screen is a little more insidious than we watch TV or things like that, because I think it actually is using like neuroscience to game people's brains, and like what that does to developing kids' brains. Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out, and we'll see. Not to make it a somber in the last second here, but all these things are all connected. But the most important thing, since some of these were connected, is getting connected with everybody. Like you said, Dwayne, watch football, hang out with people, talk about football, live minds, numbers, all this stuff. It's really just an excuse and a handshake for us to be present in each other's lives, hang out, cheer each other up, and make each other feel good. And absolutely, these shows are a joy for me because we all just want to feel seen and heard, and you all do that for us every week, sometimes every day, and you're doing a great thing for us. I hope we continue to return that in some sort of value in your life, which is special and precious. You're a special and precious soul, and you're the souls we like to hang out with because you're so classy.